To the reader. Before I come to the work itself, I know my reader will require satisfaction in two things which I hold myself obliged to give in the first to the Protestant, in the latter to the Romanist. Number 1. It will be objected to me as the Jewish tradition tells us was objected to Moses by his antagonists, who charged him with bringing magical operations among them, that he brought straw into Egypt, a country abounding with corn. So it will be said that I trouble the world with needless repetitions, that I write an Iliad after Homer, and do that work which hath long since been done much better by our Protestant heroes, and that nil dictum est quod non est dictum prius, and particularly that this point of infallibility hath been discussed by that formidable adversary of Rome, the most acute Mr. Chillingsworth, Lord Falkland, Dr. Hammond, and lately by our learned Mr. Stillingfleet. To these my apology is, first, that the clamorous importunity of the popish writers doth force us to these repetitions, it being the practice of most of their present controvertists, boldly to urge those things in English as unanswerable, which they know have been so solidly disproved in Latin, that they neither can nor have pretended to answer. Secondly, I have made it my endeavor as much as I could to avoid repetitions, which are as displeasing to me as they can be to the reader, which, if I have in many places stumbled upon, it hath rather been the necessity of the thing, or an unhappy chance, than the choice and design. Thirdly, the reader, I hope, will find koina kainos. If I had known of any author who had, in so short a compass and plain method, contracted and dissolved the strength of the popish cause in this great point, I had willingly superseded. Nor did I intrude myself into this work, but was invited to it by divers worthy and learned friends, and afterwards encouraged in it by the approbation of such persons, whose judgments, I think, almost all the learned part of England doth reverence. Fourthly, here is a new plea, that is, concerning the sufficiency of the testimony of the present Church and the infallibility of oral tradition, not at all considered by Mr. Chillingworth, nor fully discussed by any other that I know of, except the ingenious Lord Falkland, who handles it quite another way, and hath left room for some gleanings after his harvest. Nor is it debated by Mr. Stillingfleet, whose adversaries led him to things of another nature. And, besides, it is known to divers that this treatise was prepared for the press before Mr. Stillingfleet's excellent discourse came out, though retarded by some unhappy occurrences which it is needless here to recount. The second particular is this. The Papists will pretend that the doctrines I charge upon them, and the testimonies which I allege against them, are only the particular opinions of private doctors, not of their whole Church. My defense is this. Number 1. The authors which are here introduced are not pedantic writers, but such as are of prime note and highest esteem in the Church of Rome, and the most zealous and considerable champions of their cause, and such, for the generality of them, whose writings came forth with the character of their Church's approbation upon them, concerning whom it will be very difficult to persuade any intelligent man, either that such persons did not understand the sense of the Church of Rome, as well as the objector, or that they did knowingly contradict the doctrine of their Church, or would be permitted so to do, without any censure upon them. Secondly, the testimonies of those authors are undoubtedly sufficient for that end for which I allege them, which is to show the falseness of those doctrines and the weakness of those arguments which are disbelieved and disproved by their own learnedest and stoutest champions, by which it may appear to all impartial persons that it is not the ignorance nor prejudice of Protestants, as some of their writers have the affront to assert, which makes them reject the popish tenets, but merely the want of truth and evidence therein, confessed, as you will see all along in the following treatise, by their own brethren, and that it is a desperate madness in any papist to hazard his everlasting concernment upon such principles as so many of their acutest scholars do publicly disavow. And that this is really the case of the unhappy Romanist, I refer thee to the subsequent discourse. The nullity of the Romish faith. The introduction. All papists profess to resolve their faith into and to ground it upon the Church's infallible testimony and supreme authority. But when they come to explicate what they mean by the Church, and on what account they ground their faith upon her, then they fall into diverse opinions. But the Church some understand the ancient Church, whose testimony is expressed in the writings of the Fathers. Others the present Church, whose living testimony and authority they say is sufficient without any further inquiry. And this present Church, too, they cannot yet agree what it is. Some say the Pope, others a general council, and others the Pope and a council together. Nor are they less at variance about the grounds on which they build the Church's authority. This some lay in the testimony of Scripture, others in the authority of the Fathers, others in universal or all tradition, in universal oral tradition, others in motives of credibility, as we shall see in the process of this discourse. My purpose is to discover the rottenness of these several foundations as they make use of them, and to show that they have no solid foundation for their faith in any of these recited particulars, and for more orderly proceeding I shall lay down 6 propositions. Number 1. That a papist's faith hath no solid foundation in the authority and infallibility of the Pope. Number 2. Secondly, nor in the Scriptures according to their principles. Thirdly, nor in the authority of fathers. Fourthly, nor in the infallibility of the Church and councils. Fifthly, nor in unwritten tradition and the authority of the present Church. Sixthly, nor in the motives of credibility, of which in order. Chapter 1. Of the Pope's authority and infallibility. The Pope's infallible authority is in itself of no validity, and is a mere nullity further than it is established or corroborated by the rest. This needs no great proof, for if I should ask any papist why he rather relies upon the decisions of the Bishop of Rome than the Bishop of York, the only plea is that the Bishop of Rome is St. Peter's successor and established by God in those royalties and jurisdictions which St. Peter is supposed to have been invested with. But if I ask how this appears, what proofs and evidences there are of this assertion, upon which hangs the whole mass and fabric of popery, there is no man so grossly absurd to believe himself or to affirm that I am bound to believe this barely upon the Pope's assertion, that he is Peter's successor. But for the proof of this, I am by the learned Romanist referred unto some passages of Scripture, as "Thou art Peter, feed my sheep," etc., unto tradition, and the testimony of fathers, and acts of councils, that have either devolved this power upon, or acknowledged and confirmed it in, the bishops of Rome. From whence it undeniably follows that the Pope's autes ete, or naked affirmation of his own authority, though delivered ex cathedra, and with all imaginable formalities, is of no weight in itself, and hath no strength, nor virtue in it further than it is supported and demonstrated from such testimonies of Scripture, fathers, or councils. Which will further appear from this consideration, that upon supposition that the Scripture had been silent as to Peter's supremacy, and the fathers and councils had said nothing concerning the succession of the bishops of Rome in St. Peter's chair, but had ascribed the same privileges which they are pretended to attribute to the Pope, to the Bishop of Antioch, I say upon this supposition, the Pope's pretenses would have been adjudged extremely presumptuous and wholly ridiculous. From this, then, we have gained thus much, that the Pope's authority and infallibility being the thing in question, but a superstruction upon those other forementioned foundations, and not autoison, or credible for itself, that it is not in itself a sufficient foundation for a papist's faith, and so that must be quitted as impertinent to the present enquiry, and we must go to the other particulars and examine whether a papist, without any reference to or dependence upon the Pope's authority or infallibility, can find a solid foundation for his faith either in Scriptures, fathers, councils, tradition, or the motives of credibility. And if I can show that the Papists, according to their own principles, cannot have a solid and sure ground for their faith in any of the now mentioned particulars, or if I can show that all their pretensions, according to the principles of the most and learnedest Papists, depend upon this authority of the Pope, and without it are no solid foundation of faith, that Scriptures, Fathers, Councils, and tradition are not conclusive nor obliging to me to believe without the Pope's authority and interpretation, which I think will be made evident in the following discourses, then I may truly conclude that they have no foundation for their faith. Therefore, I pass on to the second head.